On this week's Carrier App, we speak with CCA CEO Steve Berry on challenges and opportunities facing CCA carrier members, and with Ericsson on how 5G, IoT, and video are set to alter networks and operations for CCA members. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's Carrier App. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief for RCR Wireless News. Well, we recently attended the Competitive Carriers Association's Mobile Carriers Show in Las Vegas, where we had the opportunity to speak with CCA CEO Steve Berry on some of the challenges and opportunities facing CCA members. Let's take a look at that interview now. All right, well, Steve, thanks for joining us. Always appreciate it. Good to talk to you. Well, maybe start with, I think we've had some big changes in DC. Obviously, a lot going on with CCA and its members. I guess, what's a general overview on kind of what we've seen so far in terms of the new administration and the new FCC leadership?
Yeah, well, first let me say thank you. They're our broadcast partners, so thank you for being here, and thank you for making sure everyone hears what's going on here.
It's still my favorite show. I tell everybody I know this is still my favorite show. It's been for years, back in the old RCA days. I love the show. So
well, thank you.
Anyway, yes.
Thank you. Oh, now you asked a pretty tough question.
I didn't mean
to
start off with a big one like that, but just an overview on what you've seen so far, I guess.
Well, you know, we've seen a lot of action at the FCC. We've seen a lot of action on the Hill. A lot of discussion. You know, a lot of legislation was sort of stymied with the debate over net neutrality. Mobile has now moved out of the Senate. It looks like it's moving in the House. That's going to help us on some of the infrastructure issues and the build-out issues. I think we've made some progress on spectrum accessibility. And then we have a new chairman that is doing a lot of things. Number one, he very early on he did the Mobility 2 Fund, and I think came with a rational, reasonable transition plan for the legacy program. Now we have $4.53 billion over 10 years for unserved and underserved areas. So I think that gives some certainty to their small carriers serving rural markets. And I hope that, and I think that the consumers will actually see some enhancement in that, because now they have a plan to get to 4G VoLTE Advanced. So that's all good. The other thing we've been very supportive of Chairman Pai, and quite frankly all the FCC, is the infrastructure plan. You know, his Digital Empowerment Act. He's got some phenomenal concepts in there that I think will speed the location and small cell deployments that will give us an opportunity to get not only to the VoLTE, but get to some of this, what they call wireless fiber capability in the 5G world. So that's going to be critical. In rural America, it gets very, very difficult to densify networks. And even in small regional towns, cities, it's going to be a difficult road to hoe. You know, I testified last week up on the House side in Marsha Blackburn's committee, and boy, I tell you, I was really impressed with her and the entire committee for being focused on how do you get high-speed mobile broadband to rural America. And I think they're serious about getting some work done. So I'm hoping we're going to see some positive things.
And obviously the timing is important too, because I think we all know, these operators, we saw the keynotes today, I mean, there's a lot of talk about 5G and fiber and high-speed networks. And for these operators, small guys, to get there, they probably need a little bit of help, because again, a lot of their areas aren't densified. And a lot of this 5G stuff is going to be high bandwidth or high spectrum bands, which are tough to deploy for these guys. So that kind of support is going to be pretty important for these guys moving forward, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you heard today, not only the panel this morning, but also the keynote session from Gowton, Achaibar from Ericsson. And when he was talking about, the low band and high band spectrum, what he was really saying is he understands that the small carriers can't make the wrong decision, and they want to make sure when they spend the money now to build out 4G Advanced and LTE, that they're not wasting their investment by eliminating their opportunity to get to 5G. And I think this concept of balancing the spectrum portfolio and getting low band spectrum to actually do the routing and some of the signaling and stuff like that, along with providing some higher band support to get capacity, makes a lot of sense for small carriers. And that's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to figure out, how do I get to 4G LTE VoLTE, but how do I also spend smart so that I don't waste resources that I don't have.
That's tough to do for those guys. And again, I know Chairman Pai, I know he's come to some events in the past for you guys. I'm sure he's a little busy right now with what's going on there, but can we expect to see him perhaps in a future show?
I certainly hope so.
Okay.
I talked to him, I guess a week or so ago, and I told him indicated he had a commitment, in which I understand.
Yeah, he's a lot going on.
But I told him, I said, we will have another show in Fort Worth, and you will definitely get a letter of invite. And
hopefully we'll see him there.
And hopefully we'll get some other commissioners down there. You know, they had the FCC meeting on the agenda also, and then so I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. Especially in Fort Worth. Yeah, it makes sense a lot. And then obviously I think we finished up, I know we've talked several times on these interviews about the ongoing incentive auction. I think we're almost to the end now. This might be our last conversation before it ends. I guess as you look at it, what's been your general view on how it's gone in terms of success? I know a lot of people were expecting huge dollar amounts. That might have been a little maybe out of the question because of, again, there's only so much money you can spend on these things. But what's been your view on what you've seen in terms of how it's gone for the mobile guys, for the rural guys out there? Well, I think we say it's a success, and I don't know if you saw the blog that Rebecca did on the auction, and why was it a success? And I still contend that had we not had a reserve, then there wouldn't be no surety that small carriers could bid and win. And what we're finding is they came to the table and they bid a significant amount, at least according to the release of the FCC. So a lot of optimism. I've heard, obviously you can't talk specifics, but in a couple of weeks we will be able to. But I think large and small carriers had some really, I think they feel good about it, and I think they're excited about potential of deploying this hopefully less than 39 months. I think the interesting thing today in that one panel was you mentioned price, and I told Eric Graham after it was over from C Spire, when he said, listen, these small carriers don't have unlimited pockets, and so they look at the two auctions as one auction. He said AWS3 and AWS3 and the 700 megahertz. I mean 600 megahertz, and he made a good point. Between the two of them, it's $65 billion, which was about what they thought a super auction would bring. So I think it was the second highest grossing auction in our history. I'm more hopeful that we'll get access to the spectrum and deploy it and get those services out in rural America sooner than 39 months. And there's ways that we can do that. The FCC is working on different deployment scenarios that don't include complicated daisy chain processes, so that we can clear spectrum that is low-hanging fruit. The easy ones. Get those out of the way. I hope we can do that. We'll see how that plays out there. Well, I guess maybe looking forward to the next 6 months till we see you again in Fort Worth. I hope so. What are going to be the big, I guess, what's your big focus point in DC for you guys over the next 6 months with the new administration, do you think? Well, the infrastructure infrastructure investment is going to be huge. The siting issues, we've got to be able to deploy the new technology. I mean, what good is it if it's sitting on the shelf and not out there in use? So that's a huge issue. Are there enough incentives to invest more in rural America in the infrastructure bills? Most of the legislative products and most of the members in the House and Senate say high-speed mobile broadband and broadband in rural America should be part of the infrastructure deployment scenario for the future, the investment for the future. And that's going to be one of our highest priorities, and we're going to stick to trying to make that happen sooner rather than later. Well, obviously a lot of busy times for you guys in DC. Definitely appreciate the time. Again, another great show. Thank you. Like I said at the beginning, I love these shows, so hopefully we'll see you next. And hopefully you'll come down. Come down on the 25th. We're going to have some nice networking parties and give everybody an opportunity to maybe reminisce a little about what's happened over the last 25 years. 25-year anniversary for you guys. It's been pretty impressive, you know. A lot happened, that's for sure. So we're looking forward to seeing you there. That sounds great. Steve, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks again. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Well, also at the CCA event, we had a chance to speak with Gowton Achaibar, who's the head of strategy and technology at Ericsson, about a keynote address he gave focused on how 5G, IoT, and video services are set to alter networks and operations for CCA members. Let's take a look at what Gowton had to say. Well, Gowton, thanks for joining us today. We always appreciate it. Maybe start off with, I know you had a nice keynote this morning, and I thought maybe you could get a little more insight on maybe how CCA members should approach the transformation that's happening across the mobile telecom space. I mean, obviously for these guys, they're smaller operators, but they are part of the big ecosystem. I guess, how does Ericsson view maybe their place in this whole transformation for the mobile telecom space?
I mean, obviously they will play a role in the transformation, and they will have to participate in transformation. The challenge, though, is to figure out how they participate in that transformation, and how do they figure out what use cases is relevant for them. And so it's really about understanding your environment, figuring out who are the users, what are the use cases, what are the willingness to pay, and build a business case that support a use case. So in an urban market, maybe a connected car solution might be a good solution. In a rural market, maybe it's about healthcare and how do you manage home healthcare for elderly versus say another type of application. So it's important that for every rural community, the rural carrier understand what is the application that makes sense for their situation, and work with companies like us to help put that together into a business case and then ultimately into product and system requirements.
Makes sense. So obviously, even for it's almost like what the big guys have to do, go through those use cases scenarios, but just on a smaller scale for what they need in their communities. Then.
Yeah, I mean the big guys are doing that. They're doing that in terms of what works for in their environments. What are the kinds of use cases make sense for them? They're backing into what kinds of then system requirements are necessary. What does the product needs to look like? And hence you have a solution that would work.
Makes sense, makes sense. Now obviously, maybe connected with that a little bit is, I know there's a lot of talk about 5G and IoT, and I know in your speech you kind of talked a little bit about that as well. I know for these small guys, maybe those terms are maybe a little more forward-looking for them, but I guess, how should they look at, at that approach at this point? I mean, it's probably still early in the game for them, but I guess how do you view, where should they be today in terms of their moves towards 5G and IoT?
As I talked about this morning, I mean, if you think of the previous Gs, it was very much a very well understood customer. It was the consumer or maybe an enterprise customer. It was about voice and data. I think as we look at 5G, we have to start thinking about who is going to be the user for that, what are the use cases, and obviously IoT is a big use cases, and as I showed this morning, the machines are going to outpace humans by 2021.
That was a great stat you showed.
15 billion machines versus 13 billion human devices. And so what that means is that the rural carriers have to start thinking about that. And it's not something that they will do this year, next year, but certainly there is a process and a set of steps that need to be gone through here for them to evolve from the current 4G network into a 5G environment and offering service and solution beyond the traditional customer they were accustomed to serving.
That's an interesting point there. I know obviously for these guys it's a big move, but something you have to kind of at least be looking at it and just starting the transition, at least looking at the process and know what's ahead of them. Otherwise, so they're not so scared of the whole situation. So
and it'll have an impact on their business models. It'll have an impact on their organizational structure. It'll have an impact on their go-to-market model. How do they service an IoT type customer versus a typical store where you'll sell a handset to an end user? If you have thousands of IoT devices, how do you provision those on a network? So there are more and different challenges that have to be looked at in the context of an IoT 5G environment.
Makes sense. Now, I know a topic you touched on this morning too was kind of the move towards virtualization. Obviously, NFV and SDN and cloud are becoming bigger parts of the whole conversation and the ecosystem out there. Again, for these small guys, it's probably maybe a little down the road for them, but I guess what's your view on the impact that virtualization is going to have on these small guys, on their networks? I mean, obviously it's a road they're going to have to go down at some point, but how do you view that impact, from what you guys are seeing in terms of how it'll impact their operations?
Well, it's a step that is necessary. I mean, when we talk about 5G, we talk about a concept of network slicing. And so for you to do network slicing, you have to have a virtualized environment, because network slicing is essentially linking a bunch of software modules together to create a solution for a specific, particular segment that you're trying to serve. And so virtualization will be a necessary thing that has to happen. It will take time. The challenge is to figure out where to start and how to build a transition plan so that you get a virtualized network over time. Because by the time the 5G radios are ready, you want to be in a position where you have a virtualized network to serve the kinds of use cases we were talking about that are necessary that a virtualized network is necessary to support.
That seems like a great angle too for a company like Ericsson or any vendors out there to really kind of be that stepping stone or that helper for these operators, because again, this is probably big moves that they don't have the personnel in place to handle, but to have a good partner in place is a big part of helping them do that.
Absolutely, we're very much looking at this problem across the board. We're looking at it in terms of how does virtualization apply to the various different segments in the market. So you have the very big players, you have mid-sized players, and you have very small players. And each one of them will approach the topic and the challenges of virtualization differently. And so as a vendor and as a partner, to our customers, we look at what are the challenges for the various segments and how do we facilitate and enable success in these segments to virtualize their networks.
Yeah, great insight there. Then maybe a final question. I know one thing you touched on also was the intelligent connectivity, I think is what you referred to it as. And it kind of almost really dug into kind of this whole process of what 5G and everything's going to be in terms of controlling a network. Maybe you can touch a bit more on kind of what that was about and kind of how you view the importance of this for mobile operators out there.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is that 4G and 5G will coexist.
Yep.
And the way 4G and 5G will coexist is that we will let the 5G systems, which is probably high bandwidth, handle the application and the use cases that should handle, and let the 4G network handle the use cases that it's designed to handle.
Yep.
And the way to do that is through a couple of mechanisms. One is, today we use carrier aggregation, where we're aggregating low band and mid band spectrum to allow the mobile to connect to the low band spectrum, so that
I can anchor almost.
Anchor in the low band spectrum, so that it has a better uplink performance as far as the high band spectrum is concerned. And then this allows the high band spectrum to serve the mobile from a downlink standpoint, because the downlink power is higher than the uplink.
And all the video coming down from downlink.
Exactly. And so the same thing will apply to a 5G, 4G environment, where we're talking about the concept of dual connectivity. So you anchor the mobile from a signaling standpoint in the 4G network, and then you let the 4G network, or you could say the RAN controller, direct the data traffic in terms of which is the best network for the data traffic to run over. If the mobile is in a 5G environment, then maybe the data traffic runs over 5G. If it's in a 4G, it runs over 4G. So the ability to use both spectrum intelligently by anchoring the signal and leveraging which data plane it makes most sense.
Yeah, and that seems to be pretty important too, because a lot of these small guys are just now in the midst or maybe finishing up their 4G deployments, and for them, they want to make sure they get them as much usage as possible out of those networks. They don't want to all of a sudden have to like scrap these networks. They want to be able to use these as much as they can, and if they can use that to support 5G, that's a big bonus.
And that was one of my points this morning, that the 4G network, you need a good, strong 4G network to offer up some of the 5G capability we're talking about, because you want to leverage both networks. And we've done simulations which shows that you get an increased performance, significant increased performance, if you can leverage both networks using these concepts of smart connectivity.
Yeah, so I know there's always talk about 5G, but operators should know that 4G spending should not be cut off yet. There's obviously still a lot to go with 4G at least, and that's a good base layer for 5G. So
yeah, there's still a lot can be squeezed out of the 4G network. There's a lot of technologies that we're looking at in 5G that can apply to 4G. Massive MIMO, multi-user MIMO, a lot of the virtualized RAN concepts. So a lot of these can be applied in the 4G network to increase the capacity of the 4G. So you get more out of the 4G as you plan towards a 5G road.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, great. Gowton, definitely appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check out our next carrier app when we speak with Berry and Wireless CEO Iyad Shirazi to get an update on efforts to free up spectrum resources in the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS band. Thanks for watching.